Thank you, David Limbaugh. Folks, as you know, we have a lot of speakers, and we do our very best to keep everyone on time. We do have a timer in front of us, and do you know what it means when that red light goes off? Not very much. I had a speaker earlier this morning as we was walking off said, "I'm sorry I went so long." And I'm thinking, well, now what? Do we go in the Wayback Machine and get that time back? Anyway, we're doing the best that we can, but aren't they good speeches? Aren't we grateful for the wonderful speeches we've heard? All right, well, now I'm going to bring up our cleanup hitter. Our last speech of this afternoon is a man who was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to immigrants from India. And he would one day become governor of that state. Isn't America wonderful? He was first elected to Congress in 2004 and then re-elected in 2006. In 2007, he won his race to become governor. And after his first term of dramatic reform in political ethics in Louisiana, education reform, and business improvements, he was re-elected in 2011 in a landslide. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome from Louisiana, Governor Bobby Jindal.
Take me home to Louisiana. Take me back to the place where I belong. Take me home to Louisiana, 'cause I'm sure I've stayed away so long.
Thank y'all very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for that very warm. Thank you for that generous reception. You know, it's so great to be here tonight with you in Washington, D.C. Well, actually, that's not really quite true. It's never really great to be in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is a very, very funny place. I've had the opportunity to work here now 5 different times. First time I was here, I was an intern. There's no job too menial or too lowly for them to give an intern to do. Learned a lot about the copy machine, the coffee machine, and those kinds of things. Came back here, I worked in the private sector the second time. The third time I was here, I was the ED of the National Commission on the Future, the Bipartisan Commission on the Future of Medicare. We came so close to finding a bipartisan solution to strengthening and reforming Medicare. I believe we were torpedoed because the president at the time, President Clinton, couldn't control his lust. And thanks to that, torpedoed the commission, thanks to the whole Lewinsky scandal. Came back a 4th time. I was an assistant secretary in the Bush administration. Now, I was an honor to work for President Bush, but I also saw firsthand some of the waste in federal government, how they spend our tax dollars. But the most interesting time I came to D.C. was the 5th time. I had the privilege to come here as a congressman. And let me tell you, when you come as a congressman, it's a whole different experience. It's like somebody gives you the secret password. I got a pin, you see. When you first get elected, they give you this pin that allows you to go anywhere you want in the Capitol. Then they give you a license plate for your car, and it's pretty interesting. It says H, and it's got a number on it. The lower the number, the more important you are. You find out very quickly with that license plate, you're allowed to park wherever you want. I was circling the Rayburn building. I couldn't find a parking spot. The Capitol police officer came outside and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, there's no parking spots." He said, "Congressman, that's not for you. You park wherever you want. You don't worry about those signs." Then they give you an MRA. They give you about $1 million to run your office. You can spend it however you want. You know, it's an amazing thing when you get elected to Congress and they give you the secret keys. Your jokes get funnier. You're smarter. You're better looking. I told my colleagues, I said, I want you to try something. When you go to your office the next day, the next group of lobbyists that come see you, I want you to say the dumbest thing you can think of. You make up the dumbest thing. You tell them the sun rose in the west this morning. You saw it. And I guarantee you, they'll try to agree with you. Let's say, "Congressman, that's the smartest thing I've ever heard. I saw the sun rise in the west." You see, I know because I lost my first election. And people ask me, what's the difference between losing and winning an election? When you win an election, you got a lot more friends. When I won my election, I remember there was a guy that had endorsed one of my opponents. Elected official had gone on TV, he had criticized me, he had attacked me. He came to see me after I won. He said, "Bobby, I was secretly for you from the very first day." I said, "I don't even know what that means." I said, "Next time, I want you to be secretly for the other guy. I want you to be publicly for me. That's what I want the next time. The reason I tell you all that is D.C. is a very phony environment. It's a very dangerous environment for our elected officials. I think we need to change how we pay them. They always complain we don't pay them enough. I think we need to pay them a per diem, except we pay them more for every day they leave Washington rather than every day they stay in Washington. You know, everything in Washington, D.C. is about politics and political slogans. You may remember a few years back, Bill Clinton ran for president with the slogan, "It's the economy, stupid." Now, the point that he was making was that economic concerns are really all that matter. I certainly agree the economy is important and his campaign won, but I think that is a very flawed view of America. Every political strategist tells their candidates focus almost exclusively on economic issues. I disagree. I think the key to a strong America is economic strength and our democratic system of governing. Here's what I believe. As America's culture goes, so goes America. I'm glad we've got a free market economy. I'm glad we've got a democratic system. But it's not the economy, stupid. Rather, it should be, it's the culture, stupid. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm all for capitalism and a strong economy. But capitalism and free enterprise will fail in a country where people don't respect the rule of law. They don't care for each other. They don't share a common view of the dignity of all mankind as God's creation. Put simply, culture matters. Now, don't get me wrong. Again, I love democracy, but even democracy will fail in a place where the collective intentions of the governed are bent on selfishness, greed, lawlessness, or on subjugating others. Democracy only works when we can rely on the bedrock foundation of a culture where people share a common commitment to doing the right thing and to playing by the rules. Otherwise, democracy simply becomes the will of the mob. American success relies on a healthy culture. A culture that admits that some things are right, some things are wrong. A culture that respects life. A culture that honors the dignity of every individual and honors the values of our Judeo-Christian ethic. There's no magic to our free enterprise system or to our democracy or even to our mighty military that cannot be undone by men behaving badly. You've heard it said that liberty cannot be established without morality, nor morality without faith. Today, that's an unfashionable sentiment in our society. Many want us to believe that a completely secular society is a desirable goal for America. If our culture is sick, capitalism, democracy, and military might will not save us. The countries of Western Europe have weakened themselves by adopting a secular worldview which pushes matter of faith to the side. I've got no interest in seeing America go the way of Europe. As for me, I think Carville and Clinton got it wrong. As for me, I think it's the culture, stupid. And that brings me to what I want to talk to you about today. There's so much this president, the Obama administration, has done that worries me and that weakens our country. I worry about $18 trillion of debt. I worry about Obamacare putting bureaucrats between us and our doctors. I worry about the EPA smothering our economy. I worry about taxes and borrowing and regulations. I worry about the growth of the federal government. But with conservative leadership, we can reverse much of that damage. The thing that worries me the most, the thing that keeps me up at night, is this president's relentless efforts to change the definition of the American dream. You see it in his actions, you hear it in his speeches. If you listen to this president long enough, you understand what he means about the American dream. It's all about envy and class warfare. It's about dividing us. It's about redistribution. It's about growing the federal government to make it bigger, more expensive, more expansive, more like Europe, more involved in our lives. I don't know about you, but that is not the American dream that my parents taught me. The American dream I learned about was an America where we are forever young. An America where our best days are always ahead of us. An America where the circumstances of your birth don't determine your outcomes as an adult in America. Where we're not guaranteed equal outcomes, we are guaranteed equal opportunity. If you work hard, get a great education, you can do great things in this country. Now, the reason this is so important to me is my parents, they have lived the American dream. My daddy's 1 of 9. First and the only one in the family to get past the 5th grade. Literally grew up in a house without electricity, without running water. I know because we heard these stories every single day of our lives. Good luck trying to get an allowance from a guy like that. But here's the amazing thing. Nearly 50 years ago, my parents came halfway across the world to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. They had never been on a plane. They had never been to Louisiana. They had never even met anybody who had been to Louisiana or was from Louisiana. Imagine, you can't even ask somebody, what's the weather like? What's the food like? What are the people like? Yet my dad brought his pregnant wife, my mom, halfway across the world because they knew in their bones, even though they had never visited, they knew that there was this special place. And that if you got here, and they came legally, but that if you got here, and by the way, Mr. President, it's not that hard. We don't need a comprehensive bill. All we need from him is to do his job, secure the border. That's all we need him to do and get it done. But they knew in their bones if you could get here and if you worked hard, you could pursue the American dream. You could create even more opportunities for your children and your grandchildren. There was freedom. There was opportunity in this great country. My dad got here. My mom was at school at LSU. My dad was in their married student apartment, didn't know anybody. He wanted a job. He didn't want a handout. He started calling company after company in the yellow pages. And I love what happens because he keeps calling and calling and calling, day after day, hour after hour. Finally, he wears somebody down. Finally, there's a guy that just hires him sight unseen and says to him at a railroad company, you can start Monday morning. I love what my dad says next. He tells his new boss, hasn't even met the man, well, that's great. He said, now, I don't have a car. I don't have a driver's license. You're going to have to pick me up on the way to work Monday morning. Only my dad could get away with that. Boss was so taken by his desire to work, he did exactly that. 6 months later, I was born. Now, I was what you would politely call a pre-existing condition back when I was born. There was no Obamacare or anything like that. And they were married. I don't mean I predated their marriage. I just predated their insurance coverage. And here's the amazing thing. I was born at the same hospital where years later, 2 of our 3 children will be born. Now, when our kids were born, we had to fill out hours of paperwork. When I was born, my dad, there was no insurance to cover me. My dad went to the doctor. He didn't sign a piece of paper. He didn't apply for a government program. He went to the doctor. He said, I'll send you a check every month until I pay this bill in full. And that's exactly what he did. He just shook hands with the doctor, 2 men in the hospital shaking hands, making a commitment to pay that bill. I don't know if that would work today. That was a simpler time. I asked my dad, how do you pay for a baby on layaway? How exactly does that work? I mean, if you skip a payment, can they take the baby back? What do they do? He assures me, he says, son, you're paid for. Don't worry. Nobody's coming to take you home. Now, I mentioned 2 of our 3 kids were born at that hospital. The 3rd kid was the child that was born at home. Now, I don't have time to tell you that entire story. I'll just tell you one thing I learned from that story. Every man in here, you need to go home and thank your moms, your wives, your sisters, your daughters. There's a reason God Almighty in His infinite wisdom does not allow men to have babies. The dumbest thing I ever heard was a week later in church, a guy, because we didn't plan this. The baby just came out so quickly. My wife delivered literally on the floor in our bedroom, just the 2 of us. And everybody's congratulating me. I just caught the baby. I didn't do anything. I mean, my part was pretty easy. A week later in church, a guy says to me, the same thing happened to me. I said, how did the same thing happen to you? He said, well, I had me a kidney stone. It's exactly the same thing. I swear. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. He said, unless it was a 9-pound kidney stone, I wouldn't go home and tell my wife that. I will tell you this. I've been married to my wife for 17 years. I've only lied to her once. And it was that morning. Our baby comes out. You know, on TV, they come out, they're all pink, and they're beautiful, and they're wrapped in a blanket. It's not like that in real life. So she's asking me, you know, she can't see. She's like, how does he look? How's our son look? If I was honest, I would have said, he doesn't look like he's done. Let's put him back in for a little longer. I didn't say that. If I was really being honest, what I really was thinking was, he looks like your side of the family. He doesn't look like my side of the family. But you know, I like being married, so I didn't say any of those things. I said, he is a beautiful, handsome boy, 10 fingers, 10 toes. And here's the amazing thing. She was in pain. She was in her night clothes. She was in distress. The first time I handed her our son to hold for the very first time, this is our third child. We've been through this twice before. The first time she held our child, she forgot about her pain. She forgot about her distress. I fell in love with her all over again when I saw mom holding baby, holding her child. And it just reminds you what a miracle of life and what an amazing gift to be there and to be a part of that. But going back to the American dream, my dad, you know, it's funny, Mark Twain said the older you get, the smarter your parents become. And it's true, I hate to admit it, the older I've become, I'm becoming more and more like my dad. I say things I swore I would never say. My dad used to tell us as boys, if your friends jumped off a bridge, would you jump off a bridge? No idea what that meant, but I still say it to my children all the time. My dad loved to tell us, you're not living in a democracy when you live under my roof, under my rules. I'm a dictator in this house. Hated when he told me that. I tell my kids that all the time, but we're not voting on that. Daddy's just said so. One of the things my dad used to teach us growing up, two things. He used to teach us, he'd say, now sons, I'm not giving you a famous last name, I'm not giving you an inheritance. But I will make sure you get a great education. Because in America, there's no limit to what you can accomplish. The second thing he would tell us all the time would be this. He'd say, sons, you need to get on your knees every night and thank God Almighty that you are blessed to be born in the greatest country in the history of the world, the United States of America. But you know, I want to fight to make sure that our children and grandchildren can say that same prayer of gratitude as well. I was thinking about what I could talk about, what we have done in Louisiana, and we have done a lot. I could have talked to you today about cutting the budget 26%, cutting 28,000 state government jobs, largest income tax cut in our state's history, the strongest economy in a generation. Could have talked about the fact we are consistently ranked the most pro-life state in the country year after year. Our strong Second Amendment protections, but the one thing I want to talk about real briefly is we have worked hard to make sure that we give parents educational choice in Louisiana. So the dollars follow the child instead of making the child follow the dollars. Now, whether kids are homeschooled in a Christian school, in a public school, or in a charter school, we want to empower parents. Indeed, one union leader said in Louisiana, parents don't have a clue when it comes to making choices for their kids. That is the debate we face today. On our side, we trust the American people to make their own decisions. The left, they don't think we're smart enough to pick our children's schools. They don't think we're smart enough to pick our own health insurance. They don't think we're smart enough to go drink a big gulp without the government telling us how to live our lives. And here's the amazing thing. In our scholarship program, 93% of the parents are happy with the program. We're saving taxpayers tens of millions of dollars. Academic performance is getting better year after year. And yet the thanks we got for this program was Eric Holder. And by the way, isn't it great he's about to be out of a job? My only request is that the next Attorney General actually read the Constitution before he takes the job. The thanks we got was Eric Holder took us to federal court to try to stop our scholarship, our choice program. Now, I came here to D.C. at the National Press Club, and I denounced the Obama administration, the Eric Holder lawsuit, as being cynical, immoral, and hypocritical. I don't think I'm getting invited back to this White House's Christmas party, by the way. But the reason I said that is it's wrong for the federal government to try to interfere and micromanage the educational choices being made in Louisiana. It's wrong for them to try to trap kids in failing public schools. It's wrong for them to say they know better than parents how their kids should be educated, which is also why we're in federal court right now suing the federal government, saying the federal government should get Common Core out of the state of Louisiana. It is a violation of the 10th Amendment and federal law for the federal government to try to be making curriculum decisions in our classrooms. And beyond the philosophical point, I invite parents to actually look at the reading text associated with Common Core. Look at the math problems. It makes absolutely no sense. There's no reason to give these federal bureaucrats the right to dictate how our classrooms are run in Baton Rouge, in Louisiana, or in any state in the United States of America. But you may wonder, how in the world do we get to the point where the federal government feels like it's got this power? Well, for once, I agree with David Axelrod. He famously was trying to defend President Obama at one point, and he said it wasn't the president's fault. I don't remember what scandal. There have been so many. But he said the federal government is so vast, so expansive, the president couldn't possibly know what was going on. That's exactly right. That's exactly the problem. The federal government is so vast, so expansive. Remember when Bill Clinton famously said the era of big government was over? Well, never before has somebody been so wrong about something so important in our modern political history. If I could go back in time, if I were speaking to you several years ago on this stage, and if I were to ask you to predict what has happened in our country, you wouldn't have believed it. If I'd gone back in time and said, would you really believe the IRS would go after conservative groups for their beliefs? Would you have believed that? No. If I would have gone back in time and said, would you really believe the Department of Justice would spy on the AP and other reporters? Would you have believed that? No. If I could have gone back in time and said they're going to run up $18 trillion of debt and create a new entitlement program when we can't afford the ones we've got now, would you have believed that? No. If I could have gone back in time and said our ambassador to Libya was going to be killed, and they would blame a YouTube video, would you have believed that? No. If I would have gone back in time and said then Secretary Clinton would get so exasperated about having to answer questions about this that you would say, what difference does it make? Would you have believed that? No. And there's so many of these things, but maybe this is the most dangerous. We are seeing now an unprecedented assault on our religious liberty rights right here in the United States of America. You know, I was happy that the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that the Green family doesn't have to spend over $1 million in fines to the government simply because they don't want to use their own money to pay for abortifacients. But why? I've got a question for the court. Why was that a 5-4 ruling? Why wasn't that a 9-0 ruling in favor of religious liberty in the United States? When this president, when Secretary Clinton, when they talk about the freedom of religious expression, they mean you've got the right on Sunday morning, on Wednesday night, to have your religious views. That's not religious liberty. That is not what the Founding Fathers intended. What's so dangerous about this, there's no freedom of speech, there's no freedom of association without religious liberty in this country. You may remember when the whole Duck Dynasty controversy happened. One of the first people to come out and speak out in defense of Phil and the Robertson family was the governor of Louisiana. Now, you may have thought I did that simply because they're friends. That's not why I did it. You may have thought I did it simply because they filmed the show in Louisiana, and that's not why I did it. You may think I did it simply because my little boys are huge fans of the show. And by the way, isn't it great to have a TV show you can watch with your kids without being embarrassed for once? It's not why I did it either. I did it because I'm tired of the left. You see, they say that they tolerate diversity of views, that they like different opinions. The reality is they're for tolerance unless you happen to disagree with them. I'm tired of their hypocrisy, and it's time to take a stand and say enough is enough. I knew this president didn't like the Second Amendment to the Constitution. I thought maybe he would at least leave the first one alone. You know, I'm not in favor of lawsuits, but for so long we keep saying President Obama is a smart man and a constitutional lawyer. There is one lawsuit I would endorse. I think the president should sue Harvard Law School to get his tuition money back. I don't know what he learned those 3 years. You know, there is one thing I would wish the president would hear from us loudly today, and it is this. The United States of America did not create religious liberty. Religious liberty created the United States of America, and is the reason we are here today. You may have missed, the president spoke to the National Prayer Breakfast in this town a few months ago. And it was so odd because he spoke so eloquently about the plight of Christians being persecuted overseas. And he was right. There's a shooting war going on overseas. It's a silent war here. It's not a shooting war. The two aren't the same. But it was still jarring to hear the president speak so eloquently in contradiction to what his own administration is doing here at home. Yet, once again, there was a Grand Canyon-sized gap between what he says and what he does. Or to summarize it, if you didn't hear his speech, this is what the president had to say. You see, the president is concerned about religious liberty. And if you like your religious liberty, you can keep your religious liberty. Before I close, I can't close without mentioning one final thing that has frustrated me about this administration. And you see it every day. This administration's weakness when it comes to foreign policy continues to make America not only weaker, but the world a more dangerous place. This is a president that doesn't believe in American exceptionalism. This is a president who simply waited while ISIS gathered strength, that called them the junior varsity team less than a year ago. This was a president who, after the barbaric beheading of Foley, came out and expressed our grief well, but really didn't lay out a strategy. Indeed, at the time said that ISIS needed to be contained, they needed to be expelled. We never heard him say they needed to be hunted down and killed and destroyed. This is a president that, for some reason, doesn't seem to understand that when America is strongest, the world is safest. That's not just a saying, that's a true statement. I know that doesn't sound very sophisticated to the citizens of the world that occupy this administration. But sometimes truth isn't that sophisticated. Sometimes truth is pretty simple. Our enemies don't fear us. Our friends don't trust us anymore. Not only has the president's dithering made ISIS stronger, it's made America more vulnerable and America weaker. The reality is this president believes in multilateralism as a goal, not as a tactic. We must not give veto power over our own national security, our own foreign policy to the foreign capitals of the world. You know, I was going around in 2012 saying that this president was the worst president since Jimmy Carter. After the election, I came here to D.C. and apologized to Jimmy Carter. At least Jimmy Carter was just incompetent, but at least he believed in American exceptionalism. This president truly, I think, does not understand that America is not only the strongest, the most visible, but also the longest, most consistent defender of human dignity and freedom. And the world needs America. We are the indispensable nation. And the quicker he realizes there is evil in the world that must be confronted, defeated, exterminated, not simply accommodated, not simply negotiated with, the sooner we will resume our rightful place in world affairs, and the sooner we will be protecting the American people and our allies, the sooner we stand with Israel unambiguously when they fight Hamas. The sooner we stop drawing artificial red lines and threatening actions which never come to pass, the sooner we stop inviting Russia to go into the Crimea and Ukraine through our weakness, the sooner we know that America will truly then again be leading from the front, not leading from behind. Now, I could talk to you all evening, but I want to close with one final thought. I've talked to you today about the growth of the federal government, the endangerment of the American dream, and what this administration is doing to our foreign policy. It has led me to ask this one simple question. When viewing the Obama administration, are we witnessing the most incompetent administration in our lifetimes? Or are we witnessing the most extremely ideologically liberal administration in our lifetimes? I've thought long and hard about this question. The only satisfactory answer I've got is to quote Secretary Clinton. What difference does it make? But I will close with this final thought. My dad was right. We are blessed to live in the greatest country in the history of the world, but it's not inevitably forever so. Every generation has to choose for itself to renew those principles of freedom, as our 40th president reminded us. Now is our time. And what gives me optimism and hope is this. The Founding Fathers got it right. What makes America great are not the buildings in Washington, D.C., it is not these monuments, it is the freedom they enshrined in our documents. They trusted the entrepreneur, the American mother, the American father, the American family out there creating something out of nothing. There is a rebellion brewing amongst us in these United States of America where we are ready for a hostile takeover. We are going to take our country back from the entrenched interests in Washington, D.C. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
Take me home up to Louisiana. Take me
Thank
back
you all very
to
much.
the place